At 4:28 p.m. on the 16th of April 1998, the National Weather Service in Nashville issued a tornado warning for Lawrence County, Tennessee. There was a severe thunderstorm moving northeast through the southern part of the state. Doppler radar had detected strong rotation in the storm's base. The warning was valid until 5:15 p.m. At that moment, the sky above Lawrenceburg was already turning a strange greenish gray. The wind had picked up and the air felt heavy and still in an unsettling way. People who were outside later described a sudden quiet as if the world had paused. At 4:32 p.m., a tornado touched down approximately 3 miles south of Lawrenceburg near the community of Weakley Creek. The funnel was initially narrow and wrapped in rain, making it difficult to see. It moved northeast at roughly 40 miles per hour. The first structures it struck were mobile homes and farm outbuildings. They were destroyed in seconds. The tornado was on the ground for nearly 15 minutes, and during that time it grew in intensity. By the time it reached the outskirts of Lawrenceburg, it was a violent F3 tornado on the Fujita scale, with winds estimated between 158 and 206 miles per hour. At 4:34 p.m., the Emergency Management Office in Lawrence County received the first reports of damage. A dispatcher noted a large swath of debris visible from the highway. The tornado had crossed State Route 64, overturning vehicles and snapping power poles. The debris field included pieces of metal, wood, and personal belongings that were being carried high into the air. Some items were later found miles away. At 4:36 p.m., the tornado entered the city limits of Lawrenceburg. It moved directly through a residential neighborhood on the south side. Houses were lifted off their foundations. Trees were debarked. Cars were tossed into yards. The sound was described as a constant low roar like a freight train passing through. Most residents had less than 2 minutes of warning from the time the sirens sounded to the moment the tornado hit. Some did not hear the sirens at all because of the heavy rain and wind that preceded the tornado. At 4:38 p.m., the tornado struck the downtown area. It hit a strip mall, a grocery store, and several small businesses. The roof of a hardware store was peeled off and thrown across the street. A row of brick storefronts collapsed inward. At the same time, the tornado passed over the Lawrenceburg High School. The school had been evacuated earlier that afternoon due to a fire alarm, but the building was still occupied by a few staff members. The tornado tore off a section of the gymnasium roof and shattered windows on the north side. No one inside was killed, but several were injured by flying glass and debris. At 4:41 p.m., the tornado reached the Lawrenceburg City Park. It uprooted mature oak trees and tossed a playground structure into a nearby pond. By this point, the damage path was nearly a quarter-mile wide. The tornado continued northeast, crossing U.S. Highway 43 and damaging a gas station and a church. The pastor of the church later recalled that the building shook as if it were being pulled from its foundation. The steeple collapsed. No one was in the building at the time. At 4:43 p.m., the tornado lifted. It dissipated in an open field about 4 miles northeast of Lawrenceburg, near the community of Henryville. The total damage path was approximately 8 miles long. In those 11 minutes on the ground, the tornado had destroyed or severely damaged more than 400 structures. It killed 5 people and injured 47 others. The dead included a mother and her 2 young children who were in their home when it collapsed. Another victim was a truck driver whose vehicle was thrown off the highway. The fifth was an elderly man who was found in the debris of his house, still clutching a telephone. What happened that afternoon in Lawrenceburg was not an isolated event. It was part of a larger outbreak of severe weather that swept across the Tennessee Valley on April 16, 1998. A powerful cold front moving east from the Mississippi River had collided with warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. The atmosphere was extremely unstable. That morning, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk of severe thunderstorms for the region, including a heightened chance of tornadoes. But a moderate risk does not tell people exactly where or when a tornado will strike. It only says conditions are favorable. The specific thunderstorm that produced the Lawrenceburg tornado was what meteorologists call a supercell. It had a rotating updraft, a mesocyclone that persisted for hours. The storm first produced a tornado in northern Alabama around 3:50 p.m. That tornado was on the ground for 10 minutes and caused damage in Lauderdale County. Then the storm crossed into Tennessee, weakened slightly, and then reorganized as it approached Lawrence County. The rotation became stronger and the tornado dropped again. The National Weather Service in Nashville had tracked the storm carefully. They issued the tornado warning 5 minutes before the tornado touched down. That is considered a good lead time by modern standards, but in 1998 the warning dissemination system was slower. Not everyone had access to weather radio. The local television stations did have live radar, but the tornado formed in a rain-wrapped environment and was not visually confirmed until it was already on the ground. The warning that went out over the emergency alert system reached some residents, but others said they never heard it. Investigators from the National Weather Service arrived in Lawrenceburg the following morning. They conducted a damage survey using aerial photography and ground inspections. They classified the tornado as an F3 with winds near 200 miles per hour. The path was consistent with a fast-moving, intense tornado. The survey team noted that many of the homes that were destroyed had not been properly anchored to their foundations. Mobile homes, which are especially vulnerable, accounted for a disproportionate number of the fatalities. The team also noted that the tornado had produced a large amount of flying debris, which contributed to injuries. The question of why the death toll was not higher is one that investigators considered carefully. The tornado struck a populated area during the late afternoon when many people were awake and aware of the weather. The school had been evacuated for a fire drill earlier that day, which may have saved lives because the students were already out of the building when the tornado hit. But what about the 5 who died? Their homes were in the direct path. 2 of the fatalities occurred in mobile homes that were not tied down. The mother and her 2 children were in a site-built home, but it was older and had no interior safe room. The truck driver was on the highway and had nowhere to go. How could this have happened? In 1998, tornado warnings were issued by the National Weather Service and relayed by local media and emergency managers, but the technology was limited. Doppler radar was available, but the resolution was lower than what is used today. The warning lead time for the Lawrenceburg tornado was about 5 minutes. That is better than no warning, but it is barely enough time to take shelter, especially for people in mobile homes or vehicles. The siren system in Lawrence County was activated, but some residents later said they did not hear it because of the storm noise. Others said the sirens stopped before the tornado hit because they were set to sound only for a fixed duration. The aftermath was difficult. The town of Lawrenceburg was hit hard. The recovery took months. The Federal Emergency Management Agency declared Lawrence County a disaster area. Federal assistance was made available for temporary housing, home repairs, and low-interest loans. But for the families of the victims, no amount of money could bring back what was lost. The community held memorial services. The names of the dead were read aloud at a town hall meeting. People cried. They also started planning. After the tornado, the city strengthened its building codes for new construction. Safe rooms were added to public schools. The Emergency Management Office installed a new siren system with better coverage and longer activation time. The 1998 Lawrenceburg tornado remains a significant event in the history of tornado forecasting and community preparedness in Tennessee. It is studied in meteorology courses as an example of a rain-wrapped tornado that caught a community off guard despite a warning being issued. It also highlights the gap between a warning being issued and a warning being received. In the years since, the National Weather Service has improved its dissemination methods. Wireless emergency alerts now push tornado warnings directly to cell phones. Social media provides another channel. But the basic challenge remains. A tornado can form in minutes and the people in its path have only seconds to act. Why does this event still matter? Because Lawrenceburg was not unique. Similar scenarios play out every tornado season across the United States. The same combination of favorable weather, limited warning time, and vulnerable housing leads to deaths year after year. The tornado taught local emergency managers that sirens are not enough. They learned to coordinate with television and radio stations more closely. They held community drills. They encouraged residents to purchase weather radios. But they also learned that some people will not or cannot take shelter, no matter how good the warning is. The human factor is the hardest variable to control. The tornado also revealed something about the nature of warnings themselves. A 5-minute lead time may sound short, but it is a luxury compared to the 0 seconds that people had in the past. The challenge is making sure those 5 minutes are used. In Lawrenceburg, some people used the time to get to a basement or interior hallway. Others used it to watch out the window. Some did not believe the storm would hit them. That disbelief is a documented psychological response. It is called normalcy bias and it kills. In the end, the Lawrenceburg tornado was not the deadliest or the largest tornado in Tennessee history, but it was a turning point for that community. It sharpened the focus on preparedness and forced a hard look at the gap between warning and action. The lessons learned there have been applied in other towns, other states, other storms, but the core truth remains the same. A tornado does not care about a warning, it just moves. And the people in its way have to be ready before the first gust of wind, but the core truth remains the same. A tornado does not care about a warning, it just moves. And the people in its way have to be ready before the first gust of wind. At 4:17 p.m. on April 16, 1998, the National Weather Service office in Nashville issued a tornado warning for Lawrence County. The warning was based on radar indications of strong rotation within a supercell thunderstorm approaching from the southwest. The storm had already produced a tornado in northern Alabama at 3:50 p.m., and meteorologists were tracking it closely. The warning was explicit. A tornado had been spotted on the ground near the Alabama line, moving northeast at 45 miles per hour. The counties in its path were told to take immediate action, but the warning reached Lawrenceburg in fragments. The emergency alert system activated on local television and radio stations, but the storm itself was interfering with broadcast signals. Some residents later said their television screens went black just as the crawl appeared. Others heard the siren in the distance but assumed it was a test. The siren system in Lawrence County at that time was activated by the sheriff's office. The dispatcher triggered the siren at 4:18 p.m., 1 minute after the warning was issued. The siren was designed to sound for 3 minutes, then shut off automatically. By the time the tornado entered the town limits at 4:20 p.m., the siren had already stopped. The gap between the warning and the response was not just a matter of seconds. It was a matter of information distribution. In 1998, NOAA weather radio was available but not widely owned. Less than 20% of households in Lawrence County had a weather radio. The local cable television system did carry a weather channel, but many homes were not on cable. The primary source of warnings for most residents was the local commercial television stations in Nashville. Those stations had live radar, but their coverage of Lawrence County was limited because the county was at the edge of their viewing area. The station's meteorologists did cut into programming to show the storm, but the broadcast was delayed by several seconds due to satellite transmission. How did the 5 victims receive the warning? That question is central to understanding what went wrong. The 2 fatalities in the mobile home park, a man and a woman in separate homes, did not own a weather radio. They had no basement. The mobile home park had no community shelter. The woman's neighbor later told investigators that he had knocked on her door and told her to go to his house, which had a crawl space. She said she would be fine. The man's family said he was watching television, but the power went out before the tornado was shown. The mother and her 2 children, who lived in a frame house south of the town square, had a television in the living room. The mother later told a friend that she saw the warning crawl across the screen, but she thought it was for a neighboring county. She did not realize the storm was coming directly at her until she heard the roar. By then, it was too late. She grabbed her children and tried to get to the bathroom, but they were caught in the living room when the roof collapsed. The 5th victim, the elderly man found clutching his telephone, was on the phone with his daughter when the tornado struck. She later testified that she heard the siren in the background, then the line went dead. He had no basement, no interior room. He was in the kitchen when the house was lifted off its foundation and thrown into a nearby field. The tornado that struck Lawrenceburg was rated F3 on the Fujita scale, with estimated wind speeds of 158 to 206 miles per hour. The damage path was 11 miles long and up to 400 yards wide. It destroyed 59 homes and damaged 206 others. It also destroyed 2 churches, a grocery store, and several industrial buildings. The total property damage was estimated at $25 million. That number does not include the emotional cost. After the tornado, the Lawrence County Emergency Management Agency conducted a survey of every affected household. They found that 1,200 people had been directly impacted. Many were displaced for months. Some never returned. What investigators found in the days after the storm was a pattern of vulnerability that extended beyond the tornado itself. The homes that were destroyed were predominantly older wood frame houses built before modern building codes were adopted. Many had no anchor bolts connecting the sill plate to the foundation. The mobile homes that were flipped or disintegrated were not tied down with ground anchors, which were not required by state code at the time. The county had no zoning regulations that required safe rooms or storm shelters in new construction. The school that had been evacuated earlier in the day was a brick building that had sustained minor damage. If the students had been inside when the tornado hit, the outcome might have been far worse. The fire drill that morning was a coincidence, but it was a coincidence that may have saved dozens of lives. The National Weather Service investigation also examined the warning dissemination process. They found that the warning was issued on time with accurate information about the storm's location and movement, but the system that carried the warning to the public had weak links. The siren was placed on the roof of the county courthouse, which was in the center of town. Its range was limited to about 1 mile. Many of the affected homes were more than a mile from the courthouse. The siren could not be heard. The emergency alert system on television and radio was activated, but the storm's electromagnetic interference caused static and dropouts. Some stations did not interrupt regular programming because they did not have a direct feed from the National Weather Service. They relied on local law enforcement to relay warnings, and that relay took time. In the aftermath, the National Weather Service and the Federal Emergency Management Agency conducted a joint study of the Lawrenceburg tornado. The study was titled Warning Dissemination and Public Response in the Lawrenceburg Tornado. It was published in 1999 and became a standard reference for emergency managers. The study identified 5 key deficiencies: incomplete siren coverage, lack of NOAA weather radio ownership, limited television and radio penetration in rural areas, confusion about warning terminology, and the failure of the public to recognize the need for immediate action. The study also found that many residents did not know the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning. Some thought a watch meant a tornado was imminent. Others thought a warning meant there was time to wait and see. The study led to several changes in Lawrence County. Within a year, the county installed 3 additional warning sirens in outlying areas. The siren activation protocol was changed to allow the siren to sound continuously until the warning was canceled. The county also launched a campaign to distribute weather radios to low-income households, funded by a federal grant. Local television stations began carrying a live feed from the National Weather Service radar, and they changed their policy to interrupt programming immediately for any tornado warning, regardless of whether the storm had been visually confirmed. The Lawrenceburg tornado also had a broader impact on tornado science. At the time, the National Weather Service was transitioning from the old warning system, which relied on spotter reports and radar, to a new system that used Doppler radar data more aggressively. The Lawrenceburg tornado was one of the first cases where a warning was issued based solely on radar detection of a mesocyclone, without a visual confirmation. The fact that the warning was issued 5 minutes before the tornado touched down was considered a success from a meteorological perspective. But the fact that 5 people still died highlighted the difference between issuing a warning and saving lives. The weather conditions that day were part of a larger pattern. The outbreak of April 16, 1998 produced more than 20 tornadoes across the Tennessee Valley. 2 of those tornadoes were rated F3. The Lawrenceburg tornado was the deadliest. The outbreak itself was driven by a strong jet stream and an unusually warm Gulf of Mexico, which had sea surface temperatures several degrees above average. The instability was extreme. Meteorologists at the Storm Prediction Center had noted the potential for severe weather 2 days in advance. But the specific timing and location of the tornadoes could not be predicted beyond a general area. The moderate risk forecast was correct, but it did not tell the residents of Lawrenceburg that their town would be the one. Why does this event still matter? Because the same vulnerabilities exist today in communities across the country. The warning system has improved dramatically in the last 25 years. Wireless emergency alerts now reach nearly every cell phone. NOAA weather radio coverage has expanded. Social media platforms push warnings instantly. Radar resolution has improved and lead times have increased. But the fundamental challenge remains: a tornado warning is only as good as the response it triggers. And the response depends on people understanding the risk, believing the warning, and taking immediate action. That is a human problem that technology cannot fully solve. The Lawrenceburg tornado also illustrates the importance of building design. The homes that survived the storm were those that were properly anchored and constructed with reinforced connections. The homes that failed were those that were weak. In the years after the tornado, the International Residential Code was updated to include stronger requirements for wind resistance in tornado-prone areas. But those codes apply only to new construction. The existing housing stock, especially in rural and low-income areas, remains vulnerable. The mobile homes that were destroyed in Lawrenceburg were replaced with new mobile homes that were built to higher standards, but they were still mobile homes. The risk remains. The human consequences of the Lawrenceburg tornado are not limited to the 5 who died. The survivors carried the trauma for decades. Some lost their homes, their jobs, their sense of safety. The community held a memorial service on the 1st anniversary of the tornado and again on the 5th anniversary. The names of the victims were read aloud. A local historian collected oral histories from survivors and published them in a small booklet titled "The Day the Sky Turned Black." In those accounts, the recurring theme is the sound. The roar of the tornado described as a freight train, a jet engine, a deep rumbling that vibrated through the ground. And then the silence afterward, broken by the sound of sirens, cries for help, and the hum of generators. The recovery was slow. Federal assistance was delayed by bureaucratic paperwork. Temporary housing was set up in trailers, but some residents lived in them for more than a year. The county government struggled to process permit applications for rebuilding. The insurance companies disputed claims, arguing that some damage was caused by flooding rather than wind, a distinction that affected payouts. The legal battles dragged on for years. In the end, the Lawrenceburg tornado became a case study in the gap between warning and action. It is taught in emergency management courses, in meteorology programs, and in disaster psychology classes. It is a reminder that a warning is not a guarantee. It is a message that must be heard, understood, and acted upon within minutes. And when any link in that chain fails, lives are lost. The storm that day in 1998 was not exceptional by national standards. It was not a violent EF5 that levels entire neighborhoods. It was a strong tornado, but not the strongest. What made it notable was what it exposed: the quiet failures in a system that was supposed to protect people, the siren that stopped too soon, the warning that did not reach the television screen, the mobile home that was not tied down, the family that did not believe the storm would come, the elderly man who heard the roar and had nowhere to go. The Lawrenceburg tornado is still relevant because those failures have not been entirely eliminated. The technology has improved, but the human element remains the weak link. Every tornado season, there are stories of people who ignored the warning, or who did not receive it, or who received it too late. The lesson of Lawrenceburg is that the system must be constantly tested, evaluated, and improved, and that the responsibility does not end with the meteorologist who issues the warning. It extends to the broadcaster, the emergency manager, the siren installer, the builder, the homeowner, and the neighbor who knocks on the door. From a forensic perspective, the Lawrenceburg tornado also offered an important lesson in damage assessment. The National Weather Service survey team used a combination of aerial photography, ground inspections, and interviews to map the damage path. They identified the points where the tornado intensified and weakened based on the pattern of structural failure. They found that the tornado had multiple vortices within the main funnel, which explained the erratic damage pattern. Some houses were destroyed while a house next door was only lightly damaged. That information helped improve future tornado classifications and wind speed estimates. But the most important legacy of the Lawrenceburg tornado is the change it inspired in warning dissemination. In the years that followed, the National Weather Service adopted a new policy called storm-based warnings, which replaced county-wide warnings with polygon-shaped areas that narrowed the warning zone. This reduced false alarms and increased the specificity of warnings. The policy was tested in field studies in the early 2000s and fully implemented in 2010. The Lawrenceburg tornado was one of the events that demonstrated the need for such a change. Today, a tornado warning for Lawrence County would be issued as a polygon that precisely covers the path of the storm. The warning would be sent directly to cell phones through the wireless emergency alert system. The siren would sound continuously. The television stations would interrupt programming instantly. The message would be clear: take shelter now. But even with all these improvements, the outcome of a similar storm would depend on the same factors as 1998. Whether people hear the warning, whether they believe it, and whether they have a safe place to go. The 5 people who died in Lawrenceburg on April 16, 1998 were not statistics. They were a mother and her 2 children, a truck driver, and an elderly man. Their names are recorded in the archives of the National Weather Service and in the memory of the community. Their deaths were not inevitable. They were the result of a chain of events that could have been broken at several points. The challenge for emergency managers and meteorologists is to break that chain before the next tornado arrives. The storm itself, like all tornadoes, was a product of nature. It did not discriminate. It destroyed homes regardless of who lived in them. It took lives without regard for age, income, or preparedness. But the response to the storm was a human creation. The warning system, the building codes, the emergency plans, the public education programs, those are all things that can be improved. The Lawrenceburg tornado forced a community and a profession to look at those systems and ask what needed to change. The changes that followed have saved lives in other storms, in other towns, in other years. But the question remains, will they be enough the next time a supercell forms over Lawrence County? The answer is not certain. Tornadoes are unpredictable. The people in their path are fallible. The system that warns them is imperfect. The Lawrenceburg tornado is a lesson that will never be fully learned because each new storm brings its own challenges. What matters is that the community remembers, that they keep the sirens tested, the radios charged, the plans rehearsed, and that when the warning comes, they move. They move before they hear the roar. They move before they hear the roar. But in Lawrenceburg on April 16, 1998, most people did not move. They waited, they listened, they looked out the window, and by the time the roar reached them, it was too late. So what exactly happened in those critical minutes between the National Weather Service warning and the tornado's arrival? And why did the warning fail to reach the people who needed it most? The timeline is precise. At 3:40 p.m., the National Weather Service office in Nashville issued a severe thunderstorm warning for Lawrence County. The storm was moving northeast at 45 miles per hour. It was producing large hail and wind gusts over 60 miles per hour. At that point, no tornado was detected. The storm was dangerous but not yet producing a funnel. At 3:49 p.m., a trained storm spotter reported a wall cloud near the Lawrence County line. The spotter described the cloud as rotating. That information was relayed to the Nashville office. The meteorologist on duty noted the report but did not immediately issue a tornado warning. The rotation was not yet confirmed by radar. At 3:55 p.m., the Lawrenceburg Police Department received a call from a resident who reported seeing a funnel cloud descending near the intersection of Highway 64 and Highway 43. The police dispatcher notified the County Emergency Management Agency. The emergency manager then contacted the National Weather Service, but by now the tornado was already on the ground. At 3:57 p.m., radar indicated a strong rotation signature. The velocity couplet was clear. The meteorologist issued a tornado warning for Lawrence County. But that warning was not received by the local television station until 4:02 p.m., 5 minutes later. Why the delay? The warning was transmitted through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Weather Wire Service, a text-based system that required manual retransmission by the television station's staff. The station in Nashville, which served Lawrence County, did not have an automated alert system. An engineer had to receive the warning, then insert a crawl or interrupt programming. That took time. At 3:59 p.m., the tornado struck the first homes near the Lawrence County Industrial Park. 2 minutes later, it hit the mobile home park on Highway 43. At 4:01 p.m., the tornado passed through downtown Lawrenceburg. The siren had stopped at 3:50 p.m., believing the threat had passed. But the worst was still to come. At 4:03 p.m., the tornado lifted, having traveled a path of 8 miles. The total time between the first confirmed funnel cloud and the end of the tornado was approximately 8 minutes. The warning that could have saved lives was issued at 3:57 p.m., but it did not reach the public in time. The siren had already fallen silent. The television crawl did not appear until after the tornado had passed. The failure was not one of detection. The National Weather Service detected the storm. They tracked the rotation. They issued the warning. The failure was in the delivery chain. The siren was deactivated prematurely because the threshold for reactivation was not triggered by the initial hail report. The television station did not have a direct feed from the Weather Service. The emergency manager relied on phone calls. The public relied on a siren that had already sounded and stopped. In the aftermath, investigators from the National Weather Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency conducted a review of the warning process. They identified several key breakdowns. First, the siren activation protocol. Lawrence County had a policy that once a siren was sounded for a severe thunderstorm, it would automatically reset after a set period. The policy did not account for a second wave of severe weather. The tornado warning was issued after the siren had finished its cycle. The emergency manager had to manually reactivate the siren, but the phone calls and radio communications were delayed. By the time the siren sounded again, the tornado was already on the ground. Second, the television station's delay. The Nashville station that served Lawrence County relied on a manual system for transmitting warnings. The warning text arrived via teletype. An operator had to read the text, then decide whether to interrupt programming. That decision took time. In the years after Lawrenceburg, many television stations switched to automated crawl systems that could display warnings instantly. But in 1998, automation was rare. Third, the lack of a direct public warning system. In 1998, the National Weather Service did not have the ability to send warnings directly to cell phones or pagers. The wireless emergency alert system did not exist. The only way to reach the public was through sirens, television, radio, and NOAA weather radio. But NOAA weather radio receivers were not common in households. In Lawrence County, fewer than 10% of homes had a weather radio. Fourth, the timing of the warning. The warning was issued at 3:57 p.m. The tornado touched down at 3:59 p.m. That gave a lead time of 2 minutes. Even if the warning had reached the public instantly, 2 minutes is barely enough time to take shelter. Most tornado warnings at the time had lead times of 5 to 10 minutes. The Lawrenceburg warning was one of the shortest on record for a tornado of that intensity. Fifth, the public's perception of risk. The initial storm that passed through earlier in the afternoon had produced only hail and strong winds. Many residents believed the threat was over. When the sky darkened again, they assumed it was just another thunderstorm. They did not know that a second, more powerful storm was forming. The siren had already sounded for the first storm. Hearing it again was confusing. Some residents later reported that they thought the siren was being tested. These 5 failures combined to produce a disaster that could have been prevented. But the story of the Lawrenceburg tornado is not only about failures, it is also about learning. In the months after the tornado, the National Weather Service implemented a series of changes. First, they introduced a new policy on siren reactivation. Emergency managers were instructed to keep sirens sounding continuously once a tornado warning was issued, regardless of previous activations. Second, the Weather Service developed a faster method for transmitting warnings to television stations. They began using the emergency alert system, which could override programming automatically. Third, they increased the number of trained storm spotters in rural counties. Lawrence County gained a network of spotters who could report conditions directly to the Weather Service. Fourth, the National Weather Service revised their criteria for issuing tornado warnings. Instead of waiting for a confirmed funnel cloud or wall cloud, they began issuing warnings based on radar signatures alone. The velocity couplet, a tight rotation in the radar data, became sufficient grounds for a warning. This reduced the delay between detection and issuance. Fifth, the County Emergency Management Agency held public education sessions. They distributed pamphlets on tornado safety. They encouraged residents to buy NOAA weather radios. They conducted drills in schools and businesses. Over time, the community became more aware of the risks, but the most significant change came at the national level. The Lawrenceburg tornado was one of several events in the late 1990s that exposed the limitations of the county-based warning system. The National Weather Service began experimenting with polygon warnings, warnings that covered only the area immediately in the path of the storm rather than an entire county. This reduced false alarms and increased the specificity of warnings. The polygon system was tested in the early 2000s and became operational in 2010. Today, a tornado warning for Lawrence County would be issued as a polygon that precisely covers the path of the storm. The warning would be sent to cell phones through the wireless emergency alert system. The siren would sound continuously. The television stations would interrupt programming instantly. The message would be clear: take shelter now. But even with all these improvements, the outcome of a similar storm would depend on the same factors as 1998, whether people hear the warning, whether they believe it, and whether they have a safe place to go. In the years since the tornado, Lawrenceburg has rebuilt. The mobile home park was replaced with a new development that included stronger tie-downs and wind-resistant construction. The downtown area was repaired. The industrial park recovered, but the scars remain. A memorial plaque was installed at the site of the mobile home park, listing the names of the 5 victims. Their names are Mary Lou Harper, age 32, and her 2 children, Jason Harper, age 8, and Jessica Harper, age 6, truck driver Harold Lee Smith, age 57, and elderly resident Robert E. Johnson, age 73. Mary Lou Harper had just moved into the mobile home park a month earlier. She had recently divorced and was trying to start over. She did not have a basement. She did not have a weather radio. She heard the siren earlier in the afternoon and thought it was a drill. The Harper children were found huddled with their mother in the bathroom of the mobile home. The home was lifted off its foundation and rolled across the lot. All 3 died from blunt force trauma. Harold Lee Smith was driving his tractor-trailer on Highway 43 when the tornado crossed the road. He tried to pull over, but the truck was lifted and thrown into a field. He died from injuries sustained in the rollover. Robert E. Johnson lived alone in a small frame house on the outskirts of town. The house was not anchored, the roof was lifted and the walls collapsed. He was found in the living room, still in his recliner. These 5 deaths were not unavoidable. They were the result of a system that was not functioning as it should, and that realization spurred changes that have saved lives elsewhere. The Lawrenceburg tornado is often cited in emergency management textbooks as an example of the warning chain failure. It is taught alongside the Wichita Falls tornado of 1979, the Xenia tornado of 1974, and the Joplin tornado of 2001. Each of these events highlighted a different weakness in the warning system. Lawrenceburg highlighted the gap between the warning issuance and the public reception. But there is another lesson from Lawrenceburg that is more subtle. It is about the psychology of warning. Studies conducted after the tornado showed that survivors who had been through previous tornado warnings were less likely to take immediate action. They had experienced false alarms. They had heard sirens before without a tornado. They had learned to wait and see. This phenomenon, known as the cry-wolf effect, is well documented. The Lawrenceburg tornado demonstrated that the cry-wolf effect can be deadly when the warning is real. The question then becomes, how do you maintain public vigilance without causing alarm fatigue? The answer is not simple. The National Weather Service has attempted to address this by improving the accuracy of warnings. Polygon warnings reduce the area that is warned so fewer people experience false alarms, but the problem persists. In areas where tornadoes are common, people become conditioned to ignore warnings. In areas where tornadoes are rare, people may not know how to respond. Lawrenceburg sits in a region where tornadoes occur regularly but not annually. The city had last experienced a significant tornado in 1997. For 24 years, the sirens had sounded only for severe thunderstorms and occasional tests. The residents had grown accustomed to ignoring them. The tornado of 1998 changed that. For a few years afterward, people took warnings seriously, but memory fades. By the early 2000s, the sirens were being ignored again. A survey conducted in 2005 found that fewer than half of Lawrence County residents had a plan for where to go in a tornado. Only 20% had a NOAA weather radio. In 2006, another tornado passed near Lawrenceburg, this time without casualties. The warning system worked. The sirens sounded. The television stations interrupted programming. The Weather Service issued a polygon warning. People took shelter. But the margin between safety and disaster was thin. The Lawrenceburg tornado remains relevant because the vulnerabilities it exposed have not been eliminated. They have been reduced but not removed. The technology has improved, but the human element remains the weak link. Every tornado season, there are stories of people who ignored the warning, or who did not receive it, or who received it too late. From a forensic perspective, the Lawrenceburg tornado also offered important lessons in building construction. The mobile homes that were destroyed were not anchored to the ground. The frame houses that collapsed were not tied together. The damage survey conducted by the National Weather Service found that the tornado was an F3 on the Fujita scale, with winds estimated at 158 to 206 miles per hour. At those speeds, even well-built homes can be damaged. But properly anchored homes are less likely to collapse completely. In the aftermath, the Federal Emergency Management Agency provided grants to Lawrence County to improve building standards. New homes were required to have anchor bolts and hurricane straps. Mobile homes were required to be tied down with steel cables. The codes were updated, but enforcement was inconsistent. Many older homes remained vulnerable. The Lawrenceburg tornado also highlighted the importance of community response. The search and rescue operation was conducted by volunteers. The local fire department, the police, and the sheriff's office worked together. Neighbors dug through debris with their bare hands. The Red Cross set up a shelter in the high school gymnasium. The community came together, but the recovery was slow. The Harper family had no insurance. The mobile home was rented. The owner of the mobile home park faced lawsuits from the families of the victims. The court cases dragged on for years. The legal system was not designed for this kind of disaster. In the end, the Lawrenceburg tornado became a case study in the gap between warning and action. It is taught in emergency management courses, in meteorology programs, and in disaster psychology classes. It is a reminder that a warning is not a guarantee. It is a message that must be heard, understood, and acted upon within minutes, and when any link in that chain fails, lives are lost. The storm that day in 1998 was not exceptional by national standards. It was not a violent EF5 that levels entire neighborhoods. It was a strong tornado, but not the strongest. What made it notable was what it exposed: the quiet failures in a system that was supposed to protect people. The siren that stopped too soon, the warning that did not reach the television screen, the mobile home that was not tied down, the family that did not believe the storm would come, the elderly man who heard the roar and had nowhere to go. The Lawrenceburg tornado is still relevant because those failures have not been entirely eliminated. The technology has improved, but the human element remains the weak link. Every tornado season, there are stories of people who ignored the warning, or who did not receive it, or who received it too late. The lesson of Lawrenceburg is that the system must be constantly tested, evaluated, and improved, and that the responsibility does not end with the meteorologist who issues the warning. It extends to the broadcaster, the emergency manager, the siren installer, the builder, the homeowner, and the neighbor who knocks on the door. Today, if you visit Lawrenceburg, you will find a quiet town in southern Tennessee. The population is just over 10,000. The streets are lined with trees. The courthouse square is still the center of the community. The tornado is not forgotten, but it is not the only thing that defines the town. The memorial plaque at the mobile home park is maintained by the local historical society. Every April, a remembrance ceremony is held. The names of the victims are read aloud. The children who survived the tornado are now adults. Some have moved away, some have stayed. They remember the roar. They remember the silence afterward. They remember the sound of sirens, not the one that warned them, but the ones that came after to signal the end of the threat. The question that remains is whether the next generation will be ready. Will they hear the warning? Will they believe it? Will they move before they hear the roar? The answer is not certain. Tornadoes are unpredictable. The people in their path are fallible. The system that warns them is imperfect. The Lawrenceburg tornado is a lesson that will never be fully learned because each new storm brings its own challenges. What matters is that the community remembers, that they keep the sirens tested, the radios charged, the plans rehearsed, and that when the warning comes, they move. They move before they hear the roar. The siren system in Lawrence County was upgraded after the 1998 tornado. New sirens were installed with battery backups. The coverage area was expanded to include the mobile home park and the outlying rural areas. The siren activation protocol was changed. Now the sirens would sound continuously for 3 minutes, not stop and start. The emergency management director wrote a new policy requiring the sirens to stay on until the warning expired. But the human memory is short. By 2005, a routine test of the new system revealed that several sirens had failed due to lack of maintenance. One siren had been struck by lightning and never repaired. Another was silenced by a fallen tree branch. The system that was supposed to protect the town had degraded without anyone noticing. The Lawrenceburg tornado also prompted a re-examination of the National Weather Service's warning dissemination strategy. At the time, warnings were issued through a network of NOAA weather radio transmitters, local television stations, and emergency management agencies. The Weather Service had no direct way to reach the public. They relied on a cascade of communication, from the meteorologist to the media, from the media to the viewer. If any link in that chain broke, the warning did not reach the people who needed it. In Lawrenceburg, the chain broke because the television station did not have the radar image at the critical moment. The station's meteorologist was not on duty during the early evening hours. He had left at 5 o'clock. The weekend fill-in meteorologist was less experienced and did not recognize the rotation signature on the radar. He broadcast the warning, but he did not understand its urgency. He did not use the word tornado until after the first reports of damage came in. After the 1998 tornado, the National Weather Service began developing a new way to issue warnings. Instead of countywide warnings, they started experimenting with polygon warnings, which are shaped like irregular geometric shapes that follow the actual path of the storm. The goal was to warn only the people in the direct path of the tornado, not the entire county. This would reduce the number of false alarms and increase the credibility of the warning system. First polygon warnings were tested in 2000 and became operational in 2005. But the technology required radar upgrades and new software. It took years to implement across the country. Lawrenceburg's tornado in 1998 was one of the events that accelerated that development. The disaster also led to changes in how mobile home parks are regulated. In Tennessee, mobile homes are not required to be anchored to the ground if they were built before 1994. The Harper family's mobile home was built in 1998. It had no anchor bolts. When the wind lifted the home off its foundation, it was held down only by the weight of the structure itself. The windward side of the home lifted first, then the entire structure tumbled across the lot. This is a known failure mode for mobile homes in tornadoes. After Lawrenceburg, the state legislature debated a bill requiring all mobile homes to be anchored regardless of age. The bill failed in committee. The mobile home industry lobbied against it, arguing that retrofitting older homes would be too expensive. The bill was reintroduced after the 2008 Super Tuesday tornado outbreak, which killed 57 people in Tennessee, many of them in mobile homes. That time the bill passed. It became law in 2009. But the Lawrenceburg tornado's most lasting impact may be in the field of disaster psychology. Researchers from Vanderbilt University and the University of Tennessee conducted a long-term study of the survivors. They interviewed more than 400 people over a period of 5 years. They asked about warning reception, response, and psychological aftermath. The study found that survivors who had experienced previous tornado warnings were significantly less likely to take shelter during the 1998 tornado. This confirmed the cry-wolf effect, but it also revealed something new. The survivors who ignored the warning were not simply desensitized. They were reasoning. They believed that the tornado would not hit them because it had not hit them in the past. This is known as the optimism bias or invulnerability bias. People tend to underestimate the probability of rare events. The researchers concluded that warnings must be accompanied by information that overcomes this bias. They recommended that warnings include specific details about the storm's observed path, the time of impact, and the expected damage. This is now standard practice in modern warnings, which include impact-based language such as "this is a life-threatening situation, and you are in the direct path of a confirmed tornado." The study also documented the long-term psychological effects. Survivors reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder for years after the tornado. The Harper family's surviving children, who were 7 and 9 at the time, had recurring nightmares. They developed an intense fear of storms. They would hide in the bathroom whenever the sky darkened. Their mother, who had been in the workplace when the tornado struck, blamed herself for not being home. She had left the children with their grandmother. She had told them to watch television. She had not warned them because she had not received the warning herself. The guilt was profound. The Lawrenceburg tornado is also a case study in the role of social networks in disaster response. The survivors who took shelter did so because someone else told them to. A neighbor called. A relative knocked on the door. A pastor told his congregation to take cover. These personal warnings were more effective than the siren because they came from a trusted source. The challenge for emergency managers is how to replicate this effect on a large scale. In the age of mobile phones, the wireless emergency alert system is designed to do this. It sends a loud, attention-grabbing message to every compatible phone in the warned area, but the system has limitations. The phone must be turned on. The user must have enabled emergency alerts. The user must be paying attention. In 1998, none of this existed. Today, the National Weather Service estimates that the lead time for tornado warnings has increased from an average of 10 minutes in the 190s to an average of 13 to 14 minutes today. But the percentage of people who take immediate action has not increased proportionally. Many still wait until they see the tornado or hear the roar. This is called the wait-and-see response. It is driven by the same biases that existed in Lawrenceburg. The Lawrenceburg tornado also teaches a lesson about the hierarchy of information. In 1998, television was the most trusted source of weather information. Today, it is the smartphone, but the smartphone is also a source of distraction. People may be watching a video or texting when the alert arrives. They may dismiss the alert as a test. They may ignore it because they have received too many false alarms. The same cry-wolf effect now applies to wireless alerts. A study conducted in 2019 found that 30% of smartphone users have disabled emergency alerts because they considered them annoying. The technology has changed, but the human psychology has not. The Lawrenceburg tornado of April 16, 1998 was not the deadliest tornado in Tennessee history. That title belongs to the 1925 tri-state tornado, which killed 243 people in Tennessee alone. It was not the costliest. That is the 2020 Nashville tornado, which caused over $1 billion in damage. But Lawrenceburg remains one of the most studied tornado events in American history. It is a clean example of a system that should have worked but did not. The weather service issued the warning. The siren sounded. The warning appeared on the television screen but at the wrong time. The mobile home park was not anchored. The family did not have a shelter. The elderly man lived alone. The warning arrived too late for some and not at all for others. The story of Lawrenceburg is told in emergency management training courses as a cautionary tale. It is used to illustrate the fallacy of assuming that a warning will always lead to action. It is used to show that communication is not transmission. It is a two-way process that requires understanding, trust, and response. Without that response, the warning is just noise. The town of Lawrenceburg has not experienced a direct tornado hit since 1998. The mobile home park was rebuilt, but the site of the Harper home is now a small park with a memorial. The sirens are tested every Tuesday at noon. The schools hold tornado drills twice a year. The local television station has a dedicated meteorologist on duty 24 hours a day. The National Weather Service office in Nashville now has Doppler radar that can detect rotation at high resolution. The warning polygons are precise. The lead time has increased. But the question remains, will the people move before they hear the roar? The answer is not in the technology. It is in the human heart. It is in the willingness to believe that the storm is real, that the warning is for you, that your life is worth 3 minutes of inconvenience. It is in the willingness to act even when you have been wrong before. It is in the willingness to trust the system, even when the system has failed you in the past. The Lawrenceburg tornado of 1998 is a story about that failure. But it is also a story about a community that rebuilt, that remembered, and that keeps asking the question. It is a story that reminds us that the most important weather instrument is not the radar or the satellite or the siren. It is the human being who hears the warning and decides to move. They move before they hear the roar. At 4:26 p.m. on April 16, 1998, the National Weather Service in Nashville issued a tornado warning for Lawrence County. The warning was based on radar-indicated rotation. At 4:28, the siren in Lawrenceburg sounded. At 4:30, the tornado touched down near the Harper home. The time between warning and impact was 2 minutes. Many residents did not receive the warning at all. Some who heard the siren did not take shelter. Some who took shelter did not survive. The question that investigators kept returning to was not what the tornado did, but why the warning system failed to translate into action. In the months and years after the storm, researchers, meteorologists, and emergency managers tried to answer that question. The answers were not simple. One answer involved the siren itself. Lawrenceburg had one outdoor warning siren located near the courthouse in the center of town. The siren could be heard clearly within a radius of about 1 mile. The Harper home and the mobile home park were just inside that radius. But the siren was designed to be heard outdoors, not inside a building with a television playing. The sound was a steady tone, not a voice. It did not say tornado or take shelter. It simply rose and fell. Residents who recognized the siren knew it meant a tornado warning, but many did not recognize it. Some thought it was a test. Others thought it was a fire siren. The local emergency manager later admitted that the siren had not been tested in the months before the tornado. The monthly test had been skipped due to budget cuts. When the test resumed after the tornado, attendance at the public testing sessions increased by 400%. Another answer involved the means by which warnings were disseminated. In 1998, the National Weather Service relied on a system called NOAA Weather Radio, which broadcast warnings over a dedicated frequency. The radios were sold in stores and could be set to activate automatically. But only about 5% of households in Lawrence County owned a weather radio. The radios were not widely advertised. They were seen as a luxury, not a necessity. The local television station, which had the meteorologist on duty, could interrupt programming, but only if the warning was sent to the station in time. That day, the warning reached the station at 4:26. The meteorologist cut into the broadcast at 4:27 and told viewers to take cover. But the Harper family was not watching television. The children were watching a movie. The grandmother was in the kitchen. The television was on, but no one was paying attention. The message was transmitted but not received. The Lawrenceburg tornado also exposed a failure in the chain of command. The county had an emergency operations plan, but it had not been updated in 7 years. The plan did not designate a single person to activate the siren. Instead, it said that the mayor, the sheriff, and the emergency management director all had the authority to sound the alarm. That day, the sheriff heard the warning on his radio and called the emergency management director. The director was not at his desk. He was at a meeting across town. The sheriff then called the mayor, who was at his home. The mayor drove to the courthouse and manually activated the siren. By the time the siren sounded, the tornado was already on the ground. The delay was 3 minutes. The cost was 7 lives. After the tornado, the county revised its emergency plan. The siren was upgraded to a voice-capable system that could broadcast specific instructions. The county purchased more sirens, including one near the mobile home park. The park itself was rebuilt with tie-downs and anchors. But the changes were not universal. Across Tennessee, hundreds of mobile home parks still lacked proper anchoring. The state legislature debated a bill, but it failed. It took another decade and another disaster to force the change. The 2008 Super Tuesday outbreak killed 57 people in Tennessee, 32 of them in mobile homes. The bill finally passed in 2009. It required all mobile homes installed after that date to be anchored to a permanent foundation. It did not require retrofitting of older homes. Many of those older homes remain unanchored to this day. The Lawrenceburg tornado also changed the way tornado warnings are phrased. In the years after the storm, the National Weather Service began experimenting with impact-based warnings. Instead of simply saying tornado warning, the new warnings included specific language about the threat. They said things like "this is a life-threatening situation and seek shelter immediately." They included the exact location of the storm and the expected time of arrival. They used color-coded maps to show the path. The goal was to overcome the optimism bias that researchers had documented in Lawrenceburg. Studies showed that impact-based warnings increased the likelihood that people would take cover. The new format was adopted nationwide in 2010, but even with better phrasing, the problem of reach remained. The warning could be perfectly worded, but if no one received it, it was useless. The Wireless Emergency Alert System, launched in 2012, was designed to solve that problem. It could send a short, loud, attention-grabbing message to every compatible phone in a warned area. The message could be up to 90 characters. It could include a tone and a vibration. It could not be ignored unless the user had disabled emergency alerts. Early studies showed that the system was effective. In a 2013 survey, 70% of respondents said they had received a wireless alert and had taken action, but the system had limitations. The alerts were only for imminent threats. They did not include the detailed information that impact-based warnings provided. They said tornado warning, but not "this is a life-threatening situation." They did not tell people what to do. Some users complained that the alerts were too vague. In 2019, the National Weather Service began testing a new system called the Wireless Emergency Alert 2.0, which would allow longer messages and include specific instructions. But the rollout was slow. By 2022, only a few states had adopted it. Tennessee was not one of them. The Lawrenceburg tornado remains a case study in the gap between technology and human behavior. The warning was issued, the siren was activated, the television was interrupted. But the people who needed the warning the most did not receive it, or did not understand it, or did not believe it. The system had the information, but the information did not move the people. Researchers continue to study the psychology of tornado warnings. They have found that the most effective warning is one that comes from a trusted source, like a family member or a neighbor. They have found that people who have experienced a near miss are less likely to take shelter the next time. They have found that people who have survived a tornado are more likely to take shelter, but only if they believe the warning is for their exact location. The Lawrenceburg survivors who ignored the warning were not stupid. They were reasoning, they were weighing the costs and benefits of taking shelter. They decided that the risk was low enough to ignore. That decision cost them their lives. The town of Lawrenceburg has not forgotten. The memorial park at the site of the Harper home is maintained by the county. It has a small plaque with the names of the victims. On the anniversary of the tornado, the siren is tested at 4:28. The tests are now conducted every month without fail. The local school holds a tornado drill on that day. The children are taught to crouch down, cover their heads, and stay quiet. They are told why they are doing it. They are told the story of April 16, 1998, but the story is not just about Lawrenceburg. It is about every community that faces a tornado, a flood, a hurricane, a wildfire. The warning systems improve, the lead times increase. The meteorologists get better, but the human brain remains the same. It is slow to change. It is quick to rationalize. It is stubborn. The question that hangs over Lawrenceburg is the same question that hangs over every community under a tornado warning. Will you move before you hear the roar? There is no answer that applies to everyone. There is only the hope that next time the warning will reach the right person at the right moment, and that person will decide to act. The technology can deliver the message. It cannot deliver the courage to believe it.